Ready to roll? Okay, so this is obviously a lot of stuff, and I'm gonna not try to go super long. I mean, I could talk for hours about this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of material to cover, so I'll just kind of go over some basic stuff, and there's going to be sections that I won't explain the whole thing that's going on, but I'll give you the gist of it. So right off the bat, this is all about repairing sheet metal, but there's a little philosophy to go into before we even get to the repair stage. So we're dealing with motorcycles that we can get original stuff, but a lot of stuff is being reproduced these days, right? So you kind of have to take a little bit of an assessment of what you're working on as to whether or not you want to try to repair the original or buy something new. So sometimes if you just don't have anything, then a reproduction is great. But I will say a lot of reproductions at times are about 90% right. It is very rare that I've gotten a reproduction that is just dead on, right? So if you are looking for really good fit, if you're looking for something really original, sometimes stuff doesn't always work. I know that Doug, for instance, had a reproduction fender for a Triumph, and there was a bunch of stuff wrong with it. It just didn't have the right ends on the fenders. The cross section was a little weird. They're not always perfect. But if that's all you've got, then that's all you've got. The other thing is, it could also be just about throwing a lot of time and potentially money at fixing something original. That being said, I do my own work, so I always like to fix the original. Not only that, it does it keeps it original, and it gives you this a little bit more value, at least I think, a little bit more value to the motorcycle if you can use original parts. So, if you don't want to invest in all this time and effort and money, maybe search for a good reproduction, right? Maybe that's an okay thing to do. All right, so let's start with this. We'll start with some basic stuff. One of the first things that you see in old motorcycles is everybody decided to mount everything on a fender. Everyone's like, I need 5 lights, I need extra 2 racks, I need all this extra stuff. And so you get a fender. This is a 1965. Is that Kurt's? This is Kurt's fender. Is that a 65? 65 Triumph fender. And you can see it's really nice original paint. So this tells me exactly the paint scheme to use. So I don't want to ruin this before I get this all figured out, right? But what he did do is he gives me an idea as to which things need to be filled. So we're seeing there's a lot of holes that need to be filled here. So there's a couple ways to go about filling a hole. I always like to make the hole round to start with. And then I have these little punch outs, these little sheet metal punch outs. They're little sheet metal discs that came out of a sheet metal press. And so then I use a step bit like this to basically drill the hole out to the right size. And if I need a rat tail file, I will file that a little bit bigger to match the plug. And so I'll hand this fender around. You guys can take a look. This is step number 1. This is the hole that needs to be filled. Step number 2 is, getting the paint out from around it. Step number 3 is, right over here. Step 3 is the little plug is placed in the piece of sheet metal, and I use a piece of masking tape to hold it in. So then step 4, I go over here and I tack it in. And then, of course, I remove my tape because it stinks awful, right? So now I'm burning tape. Then I move on to finishing my welds on either side of the tack. And then I grind using a little angle grinder, whatever you've got. And then I finish with 180 grit DA sand. Yes. Well, I use a TIG welder, but there's nothing wrong with using a MIG welder. I mean, MIG welders are they're getting quite inexpensive these days. Most people have them. You can get them. If you are going to use a sheet metal, or if you're going to repair sheet metal, I recommend using 110 volt MIG welder. They're not good for much else, really. I mean, you can get a few things done with it, but they're awesome for sheet metal. You can dial them way down. You can get really, really small wire to feed out of them, and it does a pretty good job. So yeah, yes.
You end up having to go around the inside, the backside too?
Yes. Well, it just depends what you're going for. And you can see on the back side of these, I did not weld the back side of my plugs. So you can take a look if you like this or not. If you were somebody who doesn't want to see the plug or even feel the plug, you could go and weld over the plug in the back and then grind it as well. I don't really care so much, but yeah, you can do that. So then the other thing you might need to do once you get it ground, you might need to use a body hammer to, get the metal where you want. I do that with a myriad of different methods. Sometimes you need to go from the outside in if you've got a high spot. And so this is like the hammer I use all the time. This is a dinging hammer. It's got a really, really slight dome just so you don't put smiley faces in the metal. But this is the workhorse of the shop. I have about 30 hammers of all different shapes and sizes, and this is pretty much the only one I use. So don't run out and say I need to spend $1,000 on crazy hammers. Just buy yourself a nice dinging hammer with a good pick on the end. It's really the good way to do it. From the inside out. Oh, and also I have a number of dollies. And so these dollies are kind of shaped. They have different radiuses, and they can fit in the fender this way or that way. Basically what you do is you just hold it like this, and you'll get the hammer and you'll just go like that. You just keep knocking until it goes in. Sometimes you got to use a lot of force, but usually a lot of small taps is better than a couple big taps, right? I mean, big taps is how we get dents. Tiny taps is how we remove dents, right? So I have a couple different types of these. So this is kind of a nice body dolly. Again, I have a bunch of different dollies in the shop, but this one is probably 99% of the time. This hammer and that dolly, that pretty much does most of it. I have a few that are kind of different shaped. They can fit into smaller areas. They can fit radiuses. So when you start getting into real special kind of stuff, you might need to change the radius of your dolly. By getting a different dolly. And then from the inside out, I use this type of hammer. This gives me access going this way because it's domed this way. And then this side gives me access this way because it's domed this way and a little bit this way. This is actually called a stretching hammer. So as you smash the metal with this one, it starts to actually stretch the metal a little bit. So I use a stretching hammer for a lot of the inside out sort of stuff. So
Does that come like that?
this did come like this, and my story about my body tools, there was a guy that lived across the street from my mother in Cheyenne, Wyoming, who he was a body man for years and years, and he had a whole bunch of body tools, and he'd retired since I'd met him. But all the body tools I have were that his father used in the Depression to make money. He was from Brooklyn, so these are 100-year-old hammers, and a lot of the hammers I have are like they're discontinued. You can't find that particular shape anymore. So when you go to the swap meets, if you are looking for body tools, always look for the guy selling the tools. This particular hammer, this one was sold by a guy named Kerry Rasmussen. You guys might know who he is. He's up in Minnesota, and he always brings body tools. It's always sitting out on the table at Fremont, and I see this hammer, and I was like, that's the hammer for me. And it's been my hammer ever since. So it was a $20 hammer, right? So like, keep your eye out at swap meets. Question. This is a dinging hammer. Dinging hammer. And the back side is a pick. And this particular one's got a really rounded, I can hand these around. This has got a really rounded pick. So normally this would have gone to kind of a sharp point. But I needed a little bit less of a sharp point because I have another pick that's sharp. So I rounded this one off a little bit. So you can also do that. If you find something where you're like, oh, I need the hammer to do this or that, you can chop them, grind them, whatever. I have other dinging hammers where the pick has been removed. And you can see where somebody just cut the pick off. And what that allows you to do is get into a fender where you couldn't remove a skirt, for instance. And like, you know, it's hard for me to hammer like this because my pick's in the way. But if I get rid of 3 inches of the pick, I have a lot more room to get a hammer swing in there, right? And these were tools that the guy in Brooklyn in the 30s made work for him. So if you find a tool like this, you know, buy 2 of these hammers, cut one, grind it, do something that you need for it, right? So that's kind of what it is. Okay, so I'm going to hand this one around. The other trick for this, instead of doing the little plug, you can actually use a backing, and this is a piece of sheet copper, and it's just C-clamped to the fender, and you can see the copper through the hole. You just take your MIG welder and just fill that hole up. You unclamp this, and the back side is pretty smooth and nice, and you just grind the top and you're done. Yeah, so I use copper or brass behind there because the steel filler does not want to stick to the copper or the brass. So if you put a piece of steel sheet metal in there, you would potentially weld the sheet metal to the fender. So use a non-ferrous thing. The other nice thing about this is that it creates a little bit of a heat sink here. It creates what would be referred to as a chill bar. That's what some welders would call it. So what it's doing is sometimes when you weld on the edge of sheet metal, it will want to like just melt away. And if you can back the sheet metal with something like this copper, for instance, it sucks some of the heat out of that weld and allows not as much sheet metal to be melted away in those areas. So just a little trick. So I'll pass this around. You can look at the steps. I have it kind of labeled. So filling holes. That's like all these fenders needed holes filling. This is a 28 Harley-Davidson fender. There was a hole right up in here. Someone had something on here that got filled. This is a 1931 Super X Excelsior fender. And if you look in the back side of this, there are a bunch of those little plugs. So this one also had a ton of that stuff done. Okay. So next thing, let's say we need to replace larger sections of the fender. So let me see here. All right. So flat stuff is pretty simple, and small stuff is simple. If you're putting, filling a hole, you don't need to make a radius, or you don't need to make a volumetric shape for a tiny little plug, right? Because if I took what the radius is over like that 3/8 of an inch, there's just not enough for you to like need a radius. However, if let's say there was a fender light on here and there was a gasket, and I actually replaced the top of a 1940 Indian 4 fender this way. So the fender light that sat on there caused a lot of water to be underneath that plastic gasket or rubber gasket, and there was just, the whole area was rusted out. So what I needed to do was create a piece of sheet metal that instead of being flat, right, it needed to have an arc going in one way and an arc going in the other way. It needed to be a compound shape. So how I go about that is I have a thing called a planishing hammer. And the word planish is French. Planish means to smooth by hammering. So that's exactly what it is. So I have a planishing hammer, and what it is it's an air hammer. It's kind of in a C-shaped thing like this, right? And it's got an air hammer on the top, and then there's a die underneath it. And I'll pass this around. This die has a dome on it. A lot of planishing hammers will come with multiple domed cross sections. This is, I think, the medium one. So when you hit the foot pedal, this does 1,000 beats a minute or something on this metal. So what happens is, because this is domed and this is flat, it starts to stretch the metal out. It starts to cause it to stretch. And so I brought this. This is the pattern that I started with. Okay? It was a piece of flat sheet metal. And then this is what it looked like after I planished. So I'm going to pass this around. I wanted you guys to see what the metal does. Put this pattern, when you get it in your hands, put this pattern in the top. And then push it down in here and try to make it conform to the inside. And you will start to see that the paper will start to fold up, right? So what we've done here is I've stretched the area out. It's like basically, if a good way to say this is, I'm like blowing a bubble in this metal, right? If I'm like stretching it out. So that's what the whole name of the game is here. The planishing hammer does a really good job of stretching the metal out. Okay, so now you make a panel like this in a planishing hammer. And there you go. You can already start to see that you've got a section that is close. And so then how do I nail the radius? I have these little things. You can buy these at Harbor Freight or whatever. This is like a scribing tool, right? There's my radius. That's pretty darn good, right? My radius is pretty darn good there. So that goes the same for this, right? If I'm trying to make this side section, that's the radius I'm shooting for. I just keep hammering. I keep moving on the planishing hammer. Go back in with a dolly, those sorts of things. Okay, so this whole section of the fender was replaced. It was just beat up. The assessment is that the rivet holes for the fender brace were totally wallered out, and there were cracks radiating in multiple places from that hole. You weld that stuff up, it can look great, but this is a 100-year-old fender, very brittle. This is a lot of vibration going on there, so I decided to just cut a whole section of the fender out, planish a piece, and scab it in. Here is the planished panel. This is the cutoff for this piece, so you guys can check it out. Right there. That's the fender panel piece, right? So the next question is all right, now I've got this little turned up edge here that Harley put on for creating a little bit more rigidity on the side of the panel.
It originally was 2 layers like that?
Yes. Okay. Yep. So I just made this little tool. It's the simplest, dumb little thing ever. You just stick the edge of the sheet metal in it, and you just bend it up. Just work your way down the edge of the fender. Okay? So that's kind of some of the tricks that you'll get into. So again, this is all TIG welded. ground, hammered, that sort of stuff. If you come up and take a look, you can see the back side. It's not the most beautiful seam ever, but so that's what that looks like. This still needs a little bit of work, but it's getting there. This could totally be done with a MIG welder. Yes? That's a good question, actually. And I think a lot of times it might be better for you to quit sooner and use filler. What we're really shooting for is someone that does paint as well. You're really shooting to get the filler as thin as possible. So there's no way there's not going to be filler on this fender. I just want my filler to be like a 1/16 of an inch or less. So if we're in that ballpark, filler's going to be great. Okay, this particular fender, the fender, the Triumph fender, that was actually a nice enough repair. I don't know if I need filler on that section, but you don't really need to spend an hour on every hole. Is your question, right? Do you want to spend an hour on every hole and make it perfect?
How close to perfect does it have to get?
Yeah, I mean, really, I could have taken me 10 minutes to get to a point where I could put filler on it. It could be very quick. If it's going to go to paint, you're going to put filler on it. You don't have to be. I mean, I spent like half an hour on that hole, just because I was bringing it here and I wanted to show how far you could potentially go. You don't necessarily need to do that.
If you're going to powder coat, though,
Yes, so very good point. If you are doing any kind of body work that needs to get powder coated, you have to use special fillers that can survive the heat. I don't know what those fillers are. The powder coaters can tell you that stuff. But if you're using a regular automotive, polyester filler, you are most definitely going to have a problem if you powder coat it. So by getting it that nice is going to help you out. For sure. Good point. Yeah.
Well, if you're chrome plate, though, you'd have to be spot on. You got to keep working on it.
Exactly. Yes. So if I was working on a fender that was supposed to be chrome plated, I would have to get the entire thing like that in order for it to turn out well. Because, right? I mean, you could use braze or brass to fill up some areas. The problem with that is that when they go to polishing it, they go deeper in the brass because it's a softer material than the steel. So you see waves anyway. So yes, if you can get the whole thing nice and flat with steel, it's good. The other way you can do it too is use a file. So you just, from the backside, you just keep going and you'll file and you'll see the high spots and you can tap them down, you file a little bit more. So there's been a lot of, between grinding, hammering, and filing, that's what you're doing. You're basically pushing the things out, taking the top off, pushing the things in, taking the tops off again. So it's just like you're just working until you get down really close. The other thing that we might be able to deal with, or a good thing to use, is a thing called a stretcher or a shrinker. So let's say I was working on a panel that was supposed to sweep, like have this kind of a radius. And I actually used a shrinker on this fender. So my panel was coming up here and the radius was a little bit off on the inside here. So I used a thing called a shrinker. And what a shrinker is, it's this tool here. And what it does is you put a piece of sheet metal in these jaws. And what happens is, as you move the handle down, the little jaws inside clamp on the metal. It clamps on the metal and then it pushes the metal together. So it does this. There's another tool called a stretcher, which does this. Okay? So let me pass around. This is the exact same piece of sheet metal, and you can see the end here, right? Wait. There it is. Right? So this one's stretched. So I basically stretched this flange. You can see how much of an arc. This went through the stretcher about 3 times. That's how long it took to make that that radius happen. You don't need to notch it. But as you start to, I want you guys to look at this. This one, if you put a mic on this, if you actually mic'd this flange, it would be slightly thinner because we are grabbing the metal and we're stretching it out. There's less metal on this radius than there is here, right? Now, if we look at the stretcher, it's become thicker, and you can see it's starting to pucker. So I want you to look at these pieces. I'll pass these around. Stretcher, shrinker. And so I use this shrinker in this area to bring my radius closer. Yeah. It's going, yes, good point. The reason why it's thinner is because it's spanning a longer space than it used to. Good point. No heat. All done cold. So I'll pass those around to kind of show you what a shrinker and a stretcher can do. Yeah. I do have an English wheel, and I think it's just, I don't know. I think that there's, for doing these small patches, I think the planishing hammer is enough. If I'm making a really big, long panel, the English wheel seems to be a better situation for that. I don't do that very often, so that's why I mainly use a planishing hammer. But yes, I've used an English wheel. Okay, so let me go on with some other stuff. Now, flanges, flat sheet metal is a major pain in the ass. And the reason why is because flat sheet metal doesn't have an edge to contain it for what it's going to do. So here's an example. This 30 Excelsior fender, I put new fender skirts in it. And the reason why is these are the old ones. And I'm going to pass these around. And these things, for an original fender skirt, it's pretty amazing they're still around, but they're beat. And I always like to try to fix the original, so I hammered on these. I want you to look at the edges here. These are shrinker marks. So this went into this tool to basically mush it together. So every time you dent something, guess what you're doing to the metal? You're stretching it out, which means you need to shrink it back up in order to get it flat. So the idea was, this was wavy. The idea was if I went with the shrinker and shrank this flange up, I might be able to get it to be flatter. I would get one section flat, and then the other sides would really get crazy, and it became very obvious that I needed to just put new panels in. Yeah.
What gauge
Well, so good question. What gauge? And that's a good thing to bring up. This is really thin. This is, I think, 22 gauge steel. It's flimsy, right? It's really flimsy. So when I mic'd this, it was 22, and I said, I'm putting 20 in this one. So I actually upped my gauge on this fender, and it's nicer. So that might be 18. So a lot of times when you talk about people using sheet metal to fix things, they talk about 19 gauge sheet metal. Okay, that's all fine. Everyone talks about, I want you to go find some 19 gauge sheet metal. You get 16, 18, 20, 22, 24. They skip right over it. So I toggle between 20 and 18 depending on what I'm doing. And so if I'm working on a fender, I will mic the fender and I will try to match the thickness of metal. Between 18 and 20, that's usually what I'm using.
The older bikes heavier or lighter?
No, right? This was really thin. Was this Ignaz Schwinn trying to be cheap? I don't know. Harley Davidson wasn't that flimsy. This is from 1920. This is the exact contemporary of this fender, but this is Harley Davidson. And this was not that way. The other thing that they did, and this brings me to the next section. So Harley's fender design, albeit crazy, it's kind of cool, but it makes a hard sheet metal repair. In order to get this fender on the bike, you have to take the skirts off, which means you have to snake this thing up without the skirts into the fork. Then you bolt the skirts into the fork. So these things are always destroyed. And these have a lot more rigidity than this. It's a thicker metal. Not only that, Harley came up with this idea of let's put a bead on the edge of the sheet metal. Now this bead to us looks like a decorative situation, like, wow, that's really kind of cool looking. No, it's probably more that they wanted this to not be flappy, right? And so let me send this around. This is a piece of 20 gauge without a bead in it. Look at that. I want you to try to bend this stuff. Don't worry about messing the stuff. Bend it up. Do whatever you want. Here's one with the same bead. Exact same cross section that I rolled into with the bead roller. Try bending it. You can bend it, but it sure takes a lot more force. So now if I have a piece of sheet metal hanging out here on a rattly old motorcycle, like Harleys tend to be, at least in 1928 Harley tends to be, these fender skirts are going to flap like crazy. So by putting a bead in it, they really helped themselves out. They made it a more rigid fender, right?
After you get the fender on, you put the skirts in there. What holds
Fasteners.
what?
Fasteners, screws.
Oh, screws, okay.
Yep. So, which brings me to the next thing. I removed all the dents from here by hammering this way, right? Doing that sort of stuff. Well, now I have this problem of a bead in here. So the bead, I can put it back through the bead roller if your bead roller has the right cross section, which mine did, but it didn't fix all the problems. So I came up with this ridiculous thing. This is a little die that basically, let me see. Right? Allows the bead to fall down in the plate. And now what this allows you to do is pound from the back side to get our bead to be not dented. And so the corresponding piece to this is this little thing. So it's just a piece of cold roll that has been kind of massaged a little bit so it fits down in there. So I just hold this with a hammer, or hold this with a hand, and then I use a small dead blow to just go and pound those out. These were also shrunk. I also put this edge through the shrinker, right? So I clamp this to my welding table and I just go around. And so as you start to shrink it, as you starting to flat it, it starts to get a lot more rigid. So that's how this one was done. Let's see. What else do I need to talk about? The other nice thing about doing these repairs yourself is that you can make the fit and the finish maybe even better than Harley would have done. So an example is where these two skirts come together. This one was quite a bit proud from this one. Now it may have looked like that originally. I don't know. When I get this side installed, it's not the same, right? So it's like, it's off like that, right? So, but by doing these kind of repairs, it allows you to like make the radius exactly right. Now, is this deviating from originality? Maybe. I don't know, but I'm a little OCD on stuff, so I go that crazy, right? Like, I want to look between the fork legs and see that those panels match up perfect, right? So you can go there if you're doing your own repairs. The other thing I'd like to point out is that this one also It has this little clip that had to be remade and spot welded back on. The originals were just, I mean, they were like a pretzel. They were in awful shape, all bent up and just horrible looking. So I just made this little clip and spot welded it. I can hand this stuff around if you guys are interested in looking at it. Yeah, I'll hand this one around if you want to look at it. Okay, so then Jack Larson brought something today that was a pretty cool thing that I actually need to do for this fender. So here's a sheet metal condition. I'm going to pass this thing around. This is a dimpling tool. So what Harley did is there is a casting that goes over this. And when this thing runs down the road, this is on the spring. This is attached to the spring section of the fork. So this fender will move up and down with the suspension. And how they did this was there are these little ears, and I forgot to bring the casting. I'm sorry about that. I have an extra one. There's some ears that stick out here, and the inside of that casting has a countersink on it that looks exactly like this tool that Jack Larson built. So then this sheet metal should have a divot in it. So this section of the fender should look just like that. You should have this little divot that pokes out and then will push itself up into and locate itself into that countersink in the fender. What that allows you to do is the fender doesn't move around, right? It doesn't get all wallered out. Well, this one was pretty wallered out. So someone let the bolts get loose at some point, right? So I want to pass this around. It's a really cool tool. I think he just made this out of some stuff laying around. He said, this is a piece of hex stock and this is a piece of hot roll. He just machined this on his lathe and put the countersink to match here. And then you drill your hole in the sheet metal and then you just smush them together. Super cool tool. I'm excited to try it out. So check out that thing. Well, so what did you use? Used a hammer. I was thinking about, of course, I was thinking about getting a bar clamp and just, pressing it together with the bar clamp. But it depends if you can get to the.
You got to keep checking it how deep you go because you can go too far.
Okay. Yeah. Good thing to know. All right. Well, we'll see. I'll see if I have to redo this section that I spent all this time welding on. Hopefully I won't, but. Let's see. What else do I have up here that I didn't? Something I didn't talk about was I kind of skipped this section. Sometimes on the planishing hammer, you can just start planishing from a piece of flat metal, or you can get a little bit closer to your shape by putting this on a sandbag. And I have a sandbag or people call it a shot bag. It's just a piece of leather. It's a leather bag that has, I put old sandblasting media in it that was worn out. But what you do is you take these plastic hammers and you wail on it. And you basically are trying to get this thing kind of beat into a little bit of the shape that you're roughing it in. And now you go and you use your planishing hammer to smooth out the little dents that you've made. So, yeah, people do use a tree stump. They'll get a tree stump and they'll carve a divot out of the tree stump. And that actually is probably better than a shop bag. It's a really useful thing. You probably need to find yourself a good tree stump though, something soft, like a piece of pine might not be so good, but a piece of hickory tree or oak tree would probably really help. Yeah. Yeah, hedge. Yep. So, okay, let's talk about this fender really quick. And I'll pass this around so you can see the repairs. There's primer on this, but you can still see the repairs. I like that you can see the back of this repair, and it's good for you guys to see this stuff. You'll notice there are some of those little plugs that I welded in in a few places. There's one here, there's one here. There's a section up here. Excelsior wasn't so unlike Harley in that there were two sections on the fork and the fender was attached. But when, these things get loose, the holes just become like totally destroyed. So this one, I cut a large section out because it was really bad. I just fixed that whole section, and this goes back to the guy. Now he has to put it onto his fork, and he needs to locate the other hole. So when you do these types of repairs, when you fill holes that maybe were wallered out and you need to go back and put a hole there again, it's a good idea to not just trust that you think the hole's in the right place. You need to go and actually fit and actually locate the hole before you drill your hole. So instead of me just measuring and thinking I've got it right, this has to go on his fork. And he has to mark his hole and drill it himself. And that way he's going to get a lot better fitment than if I do the hole myself. As far as putting some things together, I talked about using a MIG welder, using a TIG welder. Another tool could be a spot welder. And so this is how, if you notice that Harley skirt that's going around, those little clips I built, those are attached using a spot welder. These also were attached using a spot welder. And it's interesting I'll hand the skirts around too. Which one? Oh, I got the wrong side here. If you hold this up, you'll notice that the spot welds are exactly in the same place that Excelsior put them. Now, is this something that you really need to do? No, but I thought it was a cool idea. Like I was retracing the steps of Ignaz Swin or something. But how you get these off, how I got them off, is these were attached to the back side. And some of the solution may be to find it and then you just drill it out. Well, for you to drill it out and actually get the whole weld area out, you got to do a pretty large hole. You end up with like a 3/16 or a 1/4 inch hole on every spot. So that means you have to weld up a 1/4 inch hole like 35 times. So how I did it was I used a metal burr with this angle grinder, and you'll see, I'll hand this around. I basically just ground the back of the spot weld off. And when I'd get to a point where I'd think I was about through this metal, I'd get there with a pair of pliers and start, screwdriver and start prying it off. So I just went and ground every one. Now what that allows you to do is not have a bunch of holes in your skirt. So now you just go back in with the spot welder and put them on. Yeah. No, so basically spot welder just goes together, just the little electrodes just pinch and they're basically doing a fusion weld. And so are they the strongest welds in the world? No, but this isn't really a structural member, right? And strength in numbers, right? I mean, there's like unibody cars that are put together with spot welds, right? So strength in numbers. All right, so I'm going to hand this around. The other thing that you'll start to notice when you do these types of repairs is that things aren't as perfect as you thought they were. This side does not match this side, not even close. I was like, oh, this is easy. I'll make a pattern. I'll make these skirts, and I'm done. So I made 2 skirts, and I put it on the other side, and guess what it didn't do? Fit. I said, those bastards. Was it that somebody in Chicago was not paying attention? I don't know. I don't know what it was, but once they got out of the fender, I want you guys to put these things next to one another. The radiuses are off. And this isn't because this got stretched or moved. This thing was captured by this fender for 100 years. This was like this in 1931. So I don't know. Interesting enough. It's cool to see that stuff. Yes, question.
And then sometimes you have to buy extra comprehension. Machine and guns
Uh-huh.
I don't know how you, that would be great if I were a laser because then you get a perfect one at a time. I was doing my part, I cut them out outside the line, and then I would grind them down to the line to make it. For me, it saves time.
Uh-huh.
Get it right before I put it on the instead of afterwards.
Right. So Don brings up a good point. How do we cut this stuff out? There's all kinds of different ways. I don't have. There's a thing called the Beverly shear, which basically it's this open mouth cutter with a big arm on it, and you just like push it through like this. They're really great. I don't own one of those. I probably should own one. But there's a lot of ways. You can use a hand shear. You just scribe on there with marker or a scribe. They have hand and electric models that you can use. I have a DeWalt electric model. It looks like an electric drill. That works really good. Chainsaw, yeah, maybe. Is that what you said? Oh, jigsaw. Yeah, jigsaw. If you have the right blade and a bandsaw, you could use that. I have a very small plasma cutter, and I use that quite often. And that's how I want to pass this one around. I'm going to pass the skirts and this. So how this works is that these fork holes get super wallered out. So if you look on the back side, you can see where I have replaced. And so instead of just making a little sliver that was this big, I pretty much just covered the hole like half over. And then I went in with the little plasma cutter and I cut it close, and then I ground it. You're fine. I'll fix it if I need. So yeah, you could use plasma cutters, bandsaw, jigsaw, air shears. Another method is you could just use an angle grinder with a cutoff wheel. You can just make a bunch of bites out of it, and then you use a grinder. Belt sanders are super helpful. Disc sanders are helpful. And then obviously your regular old angle grinders and small angle grinders. So air nibbler, yes. Air nibbler is also an extremely useful tool. And what that is you basically just cut a hole in a section and you put the nibbler through the hole, and then it just really quickly just bites little tiny half moon shaped looking pieces out of the way. Yes, they're all useful. And nibbler, I'm trying to remember, there's something one of these I used a nibbler on. So, the thing is, not that I want to condone you going to the hardware store and spending $1,000 in parts you're going to use or tools you're going to use twice a year. But if you have all of the tools, you can do, you can make your choice, right? There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, right? It's like, I can make a panel this way or I can make a panel that way. The end game is the same, but getting there is different, right? So sometimes the nibbler is the right way to cut out. Sometimes I use the plasma cutter. Sometimes I use an angle grinder, right? So it just depends on the application.
Somebody used the paper for a napkin. It's not able
The napkin's not there anymore, or the pattern's not there anymore. Other questions?
to. Well, but I wouldn't I have a couple of punch presses. I can punch out a bunch of the holes, fillers, and
Oh. Well, so here's my question about what you have pressed out. The press that I use, it has a like a center punch in the middle, and as it punches it creates kind of a little divot thing on the outside. Does yours do that, or does it just make a flat disc? Well, it's not that big of a deal because what I do is I just I take this out of the box and I'll stick it on an anvil and I'll just hit it with a dead blow a few times to flatten it. But if you look at the back of my repairs, you can see that center divot on there. Oh, right. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. Well, anyway, but so this is problematic. I mean, there's a punch at where I work that makes these. These are like the offshoots. So I go over to the cup that catches these, and I just pour them in a bag and take them home. But if you don't have that, you can just cut out a section and put it in yourself. If you're making 3 holes, don't go to a whole bunch of effort to find these if you're only patching 3 holes, right?
You can do that and punch out your own hole.
Oh, yep. Yes, you can do that.
You can use this to get a flat piece.
Right.
No, you knock it out. A flat piece. Let's say going on it. So we have, well, I made one. I had 2 pieces of flat steel, so half-inch. Just enough swimming, just so you can get the piece of sheet metal in between the 2 pieces. And you can drill a hole the size of the filler piece of line. And I've used center punches.
Oh yeah, that would work.
Center punches like double freight for middle and just cut off and smooth 20 lengths of furling into the shot.
Right. Huh. So, questions that I didn't cover. Did I leave something out? I mean, there's a lot of stuff I left out. I know this, but part of it is just knowing the names of the tools, and part of it is just being a little bit educated when you go to purchase something. I don't have a lot of money wrapped up in this stuff. Some of the places where I find things, I bought this kind of stuff at Eastwood. You can buy shrinkers and stretchers that are $1,000 a piece. This is like a $200 tool. And yeah, that's still some money, but it's not $1,000, right? So you can buy, my planishing hammer is a $350 planishing hammer. It is not a $2,500 planishing hammer, which you can buy.
I got mine from Eastwood.
Oh, yeah. Your planishing hammer?
Yeah, oh no.
Yeah. So, that is a good thing when you start to look for things like body hammers. Places like Eastwood do a really good job of labeling what they're trying to sell because they want it to be sold, right? They want people to be able to search and find the products, right? So you might just go on there and say, all right, well, what are the names of all these tools? And you just go through all their hammers and let's find out what they're named, The one thing I will say about hammers is that these are old and they've got a lot of dents in the faces. And as I hammer on sheet metal, that sheet metal will pick up the dents in my hammer. It will imprint like a fingerprint onto the sheet metal. So if I'm trying to do something like David brought up of let's chrome plate this, I need to make sure that my dollies, my hammers don't have any dents in them. I need brand new, very nice things, because as I hammer on this stuff, it will create texture, which I paint everything. So it doesn't matter to me. If there's some scratches in it, it doesn't matter. I'm putting 3 coats of primer and some filler and a base coat and a clear coat and who knows what else, right? So it just covers it all up. But if you're trying to metal finish for plating, you're going to have to invest in really nice hammers and dollies that aren't beat up. And don't drop them on the floor like I do all the time. John?
You ever use a little slapper for light work?
Like that little spoon-shaped thing. It's kind of like that.
I'm not sure exactly what the shape like. It's kind of a flat piece of metal, pretty light, or just lightly slap.
Yes. Yeah. So good point to bring up. There are a lot of different tools out there to do kind of the same job. What John is talking about is there's like a spoon, sometimes it's called, or slapper, just different names for them. And it's basically just kind of a bent piece of steel, and you're just using the end of that as a way to move metal around. I do have a couple of those. I don't use them very much. I'm sure that there are some people who use them all the time. I don't know.
Use a blandishing hammer more than an English wheel?
Oh, yes, by far. Yeah. I rarely get the English wheel off the shelf. But I'm making small patch panels. I'm not making big, huge things. I'm just making... I'm not skilled enough to make entire new fenders. I just repair stuff.
Say you're making an oil tank or a heat gas tank. Would the blandishing hammer work for that? Or would the English wheel?
You mean to like create like some form? I'd probably like a combination of the two. I use the planishing hammer a little bit and use the English wheel a little bit. I'm not skilled in that way. I can just kind of make sections that need to get put in. It's to make this fender is hard. But that being said, can you buy this 1928 JD fender? Yes. There are people in Poland making this fender. It's an $800 fender. It's a very nice fender. I've seen them. They are very nice. And for $800, I mean, if you were paying somebody to do all of this, you could get $800 wrapped up very fast. So there is that situation of, do I spend the money to fix the original, or do I get a reproduction? It's just, But when it comes to originality, I mean, I know that knuckleheads are one of those things that is kind of like it's kind of the anomaly, but original knucklehead parts are worth so much money. It's worth money to fix that stuff, right? It's worth it to fix stuff that's that expensive. Whereas when you start to get into this stuff, it's not worth as much as knucklehead stuff. So maybe I'd be fine getting a reproduction. I don't know. So. Any other questions or concerns? Really, all you're trying to do is just get it less crappy. That's really what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get it less bad so it's easier to paint. That's all you're trying to use. Less filler. That's what we're trying to do here. That's really all that this is about. Use less filler, right? And the closer you can get, the least filler you can use. So that's kind of the name of the game. All right. Well, I'll have all the stuff up here if you guys want to look at some of the stuff and see it. Yeah, sure. Yeah.